From tales from the most haunted hotel in the world to a family who left their haunted home, this is the second part to the scariest ghost stories from every US state series. Colorado, the Stanley Hotel. The Stanley Hotel is an 140-room hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. It was built by Freeland Oscar Stanley and opened on July 4th, 1909 as a resort for upper-class Easterners and a health retreat for sufferers of pulmonary tuberculosis. The Stanley Hotel is largely known for being one of the most haunted hotels in the United States. In the fall of 1974, writer Stephen King and his wife stopped at the Stanley Hotel for the night. Upon arriving, they learned the hotel was closing for the winter and only a skeleton crew remained. The Kings checked into room 217 as the only paying guests at the Stanley that night. The Kings went to bed, but a few hours later, Stephen King woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. He had had a nightmare in which he saw his young son being chased down the hotel's long, empty corridors by a predatory, possessed fire hose. Stephen, being restless, went onto the balcony of the presidential suite and smoked a cigarette. This is where he got the idea for his third novel and first bestseller, The Shining. But the Stanley was considered haunted years before King's arrival. In 1940, Freeland Stanley passed away. After his passing, many guests have reported to have seen his ghost roaming around the reception desk. Many have also claimed to see the ghost of Flora Stanley, a pianist, in the empty music room of the Stanley Hotel. Guests have also reported shadow figures, eerie laughter, flickering lights, and items moving on their own. In recent years, the Stanley has hosted many paranormal investigations, including teams from Travel Channel's Ghost Adventures and Sci-Fi's Ghost Hunters. Connecticut. Union Cemetery. Union Cemetery in Easton, Connecticut is one of the oldest cemeteries in the United States, with stones dating back as far as the 1760s. There are believed to be many spirits in the graveyard, including soldiers and giggling children. The most famous ghosts at Union Cemetery are the White Lady and Red Eyes. Nobody is quite sure who the White Lady is. Some people believe she is a woman who died in childbirth and is still searching for her baby. Others speculate it's the ghost of a woman who murdered her husband. The White Lady could also be the ghost of a murder victim who was dumped in a sinkhole near the cemetery. She is often sighted on Route 59, which runs along the cemetery's eastern boundary. The people who have seen her say she's dressed in a bright white nightgown and has her head and face concealed with a white bonnet. In the 90s, a firefighter responding to a call in the nearby town of Monroe said a woman in a long white gown jumped in front of him and he hit her. The woman rolled over the top of his car and landed in the road behind him. When the firefighter leaped from the vehicle to render first aid, his hood was dented, but there was no one there. The cemetery's other famous ghost, Red Eyes, sometimes peers at people from the bushes. Some visitors have reported feeling hot breath on the back of their necks, and when they turn around, they see mysterious red eyes peering back at them. Occasionally, this ghost even chases people in the cemetery. Red Eyes is believed to be the ghost of Earl Kellogg, a man who was set on fire and burned to death across the street from the cemetery in 1935. The haunting of Union Cemetery drew the attention of famed demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren, who visited the cemetery on several occasions. They reportedly caught the White Lady in photographs and videos, but they said the video evidence is so valuable that they kept it locked away at their occult museum in Monroe. Delaware. The old Rockwood Mansion. The Rockwood Mansion was built in the mid-1800s by retired banker Joseph Shipley. After Joseph Shipley passed away, the property was handed down to his great-nephew, Edward Bringhurst, whose family lived there for several years with their pets and servants. In 1973, the property was left to Newcastle County for public use and became Rockwood Park and Museum, offering various guided tours and events to sustain itself. Many visitors of the museum today say they still encounter its early residents, all long dead. A ghost named Mary is among many believed to haunt the Rockwood Mansion. Mary lived at Rockwood until she was 100 years old and then died in the house. Many visitors have claimed to see a ghostly woman in what had been Mary's room. Many have also claimed to smell the perfume of Mary in the mansion. Rick Lovelace, a researcher and paranormal coordinator at the mansion, claims to have identified 28 spirits. He has hosted over 100 tours and used a series of paranormal investigative tools to communicate with who he believes is the family that once lived there. During his investigations, he has seen shadow figures walking through walls, things moving on their own. One time a music box in Mary's old room started playing, and he even witnessed 2 of Bringhurst's dogs outside of a second-story window. Many paranormal experts have also investigated the mansion, such as the East Coast Spirit Chasers and A&E's Ghost Hunters. Florida. St. Augustine Lighthouse. St. Augustine, Florida is considered the oldest city in America, with the history of St. Augustine Lighthouse dating back to 1589. The lighthouse was first documented on a very old map detailing Sir Francis Drake's raid of the coast, and back then it was a wooden watchtower. The lighthouse that is standing today was built after the fall of the South in the Civil War. Over the hundreds of years that the structure has stood, many people have come and gone, lived and died, and a few have even remained. One of the lighthouse's first keepers was a man named Peter Rasmussen. He was known for his meticulous eye and watchful manner of maintaining the lighthouse. He was also known for his love of cigars and is one of the first ghosts that people report coming in contact with. Over the years, the smell of Peter's cigar has been detected by many, including staff members and guests. Others have seen and heard another keeper, Joseph Andreu, at the top of the tower, only he's been dead for more than a century. His presence at the lighthouse could be explained by the fact that he fell to death while painting the outside of the tower. His spirit never left and is often seen looking out from the top. But perhaps the most well-known ghosts at the St. Augustine Lighthouse are that of 2 young sisters who also died on the property. Hezekiah Piddy was hired to renovate the tower in the late 1800s. His 2 daughters, Eliza and Mary, were playing inside a cart that was being used to carry materials back and forth to the lighthouse. When the cart broke loose, they weren't able to jump out in time, and the cart rapidly slid into the bay, plummeting both girls to a watery death. Georgia. The Surrency haunting. In the 1800s, a family in Georgia named the Surrencys endured one of the scariest paranormal hauntings to ever come out of Georgia. Before the town was established, the Surrency family owned a farm in the 1800s. Their property existed long before many folks had moved into the area and before any commercial buildings were in place. The Surrencys were a normal family, but had also accumulated some wealth in opposition to less fortunate folks in the vicinity. Mr. Surrency also owned another home in a different town. By all accounts, the Surrency home was a beautiful farmhouse, and the Surrency family seemed very comfortable there, at least for some time. But something happened that shook the family to its core. Things at the beloved Surrency home took an unexpected turn. One day, weird things began to happen. Windows inexplicably slammed shut, then flew open by unseen hands. Multiple family members witnessed the windows opening and closing on their own. Then doors slammed shut, with no one near them. And the terrible drafts. A bitter coldness that seemed to manifest out of nowhere. The family was shaken, but refused to let something as small as cold air and slamming windows drive them from their beautiful home. The Surrency family became a haunted family. They started to believe it wasn't just the house, but themselves. Objects flew off shelves. The old clock began to strike 13, and the hands spun wildly out of control whenever it did. The Surrency children refused to leave the house at night to check on the horses or to gather water. They claimed multiple pairs of glowing red eyes surrounded them in the dead of the night. Every time they sat down to eat as a family, their meals were violently thrown into their laps. These spirits seemed dedicated to harassing the family. Or perhaps it was just one very powerful, very angry spirit. The family lost sleep and couldn't eat because of the constant torment. One source mentions the ghosts twisted the family's forks anytime they tried to eat a meal. Seemingly an exaggerated ghost story, Some claimed the Surrency family made it up for attention, yet numerous people paid witness to the Surrency family's bizarre haunting. People began speculating if their home was situated on a ley line or some kind of powerful magnetic grid. Before long, the Surrency haunting became a tourist attraction. Scientists and mediums visited the infamous home. The locals believed that Mr. Surrency was in league with the devil, which seemed to explain the ghosts and the family's wealth. However, a visiting psychic medium believed the Surrency family had extrasensory abilities, to which the family didn't recognize their abilities, which in turn angered the spirits. As time passed, the Surrency ghosts became more aggressive. They targeted the little girl, pulling her hair, twisting her sheets, ripping her out of bed, tormenting her day in and day out. She was exhausted, worn, and frail. How could this family survive a haunting that robbed them of their meals, their sleep, and their sanity? Finally, the Surrency family decided to move. The last straw happened when an andoran lifted itself from the fireplace and struck the Surrency boy. Then it floated back to the fireplace, leaving the boy bleeding and crying on the floor. Even after the Surrency family moved, they still experienced hauntings, but none as bad as what they endured on the farm. The farmhouse was abandoned for many years, but the locals still visited. Train rides attracted ghost hunters to the property. Eventually, the haunted Surrency house burned down in 1925. Hawaii. The Night Marchers. Night Marchers are death-dealing ghosts. Folklore describes them as a group of spirits, sometimes traveling with ancient Hawaiian gods or goddesses in their midst, that march down the mountainside after sunset. The procession is often accompanied by the sounds of the conch shell, rhythmic drumming, and chants. The legends of the Night Marchers are rooted in ancient Hawaii, which was once governed by a strict caste system. When a chief passed through a village, his warriors blew conch shells and beat pahu drums to announce his arrival. Commoners were expected to stare at the ground, never ever making eye contact. The consequence of disobeying this taboo was death. The chiefs weren't just leaders. They held immense spiritual power and were often thought of as physical representations of the gods. These same warriors, tasked to protect the chief and uphold the taboo, are believed to continue their duties into the afterlife as the Night Marchers. Since Hawaiian was only a spoken language at the time of Western contact, the first written account of the Night Marchers wasn't until 1883. The document described various sightings of ghost soldiers following the spirit of King Kamehameha the Great on the Big Island. This wasn't the only claim by Hawaii residents who have seen the frightening ghosts of the night. Indeed, the legends of the Night Marchers are still told throughout the Hawaiian Islands today, with more than a few locals who proclaim they are not just a fairy tale. Across the island chain, residents have reported seeing a line of torches moving down the mountain, many times in areas with sheer cliffs and no roads or trails for miles. Some say the Night Marchers leave just their footprints behind, while others claim they float above the ground without leaving a trace. In either case, the universal understanding among believers is that you should never cross a Night Marcher's path. As legend tells it, any unfortunate mortal who hears the warning sounds of a nearby possession should run and hide or lie down on the ground to let them pass. But most importantly, follow the ancient taboo and never make eye contact or face the ultimate consequence. Idaho. The old Idaho Penitentiary. The state penitentiary began in 1870 as a one-cell house that quickly grew into a complex of buildings surrounded by a large sandstone wall. As part of their penance, the prisoners mined nearby rock quarries to build the very walls that would hold them captive. Over the next 100 years, more than 13,000 convicts, including 250 women, would call the Idaho State Penitentiary home. At least 110 of them died within their self-made walls from old age, illness, and murder. In Idaho's history, only 11 state executions took place. 10 of them were carried out here at this penitentiary. The most notorious inmate confined to the halls of the Idaho State Penitentiary was Raymond Allen Snowden, a man once dubbed Idaho's Jack the Ripper. Snowden was convicted of murder in 1956 and sentenced to death by hanging at Idaho State Penitentiary. He murdered Cora Dean, a local woman and mother of two, during a scuffle after a night of drinking. Snowden claimed he backhanded Dean, she kicked him, and then he snapped. Using a pocket knife, Snowden stabbed Cora 35 times, and before his hanging, Snowden confessed to murdering 2 other women. At 12:06 a.m. on October 18th, 1957, Ray Snowden was executed. There have been many accounts of unusual happenings in the prison complex, but Five House, the building where Snowden was executed, seems to be the most active. Some speculate Snowden's spirit never left, haunting the grounds since that October morning in 1957. About a year after the prison was placed on the National Register of Historic Places, it opened up for tours. Guides and visitors attest to the sinister feelings, strange sounds, voices, and the dark entities they feel are still lurking in the cell blocks of old Idaho State Penitentiary. All of the eerie activity intensifies near the frightening solitary confinement cell and the gallows. And that concludes part 2 of the scariest ghost story from every single US state. If you guys missed part 1, I will have a link to it in the description. Also, if I mentioned your state in here, let me know down in the comments below what state you are from and if you've ever heard of this ghost story before. But yeah, anyway, without further ado, make sure you guys subscribe with post notifications on so you guys don't miss the 3rd part to this. And yeah, hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Peace out.